Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia and welcome back to our 10 parts guide series covering reforms in Total War 3 Kingdoms. This episode is part 5 and will be an overview of the purple reforms. So let's get started. As we can see here, there are a total of 17 purple reforms. They correspond to the Sentinel class and provides unlocks to the Sentinel retinue units. They also unlock economic buildings, provide industry and commerce multipliers, reduce building upkeep, and shorten construction time. Today we'll be going over all 17 of these reforms individually, but before we do that, I want to continue what we have been doing with our other colors and first redraw the purple portion of the reform tree, so we can do away with the artistic branches and show clear lines of progression. This is to alleviate the overcrowding on the screen and more importantly, improve our discussion. As you can see here, I have redrawn the reform tree in the same style that we have done for the other colors. I have the state monopolies reform highlighted in yellow because it requires the iron and salt agency yellow reform to unlock. We have seen similar requirements in the other colors as this is due to the Wuxing synergy interactions in the game, which weaves the branches of different colors together according to the property of Wuxing. Other than that, we can apply tiers again here to facilitate our discussions. The purple reform is a bit disjointed when compared to other branches, as we can see 3 isolated branches here. And of the 3 branches, most of the actions revolve around the currency-based economy branch, which is where we'll start with our 4 tier 1 reforms. We can see here that the in-game info panel reads that the currency-based economy reform starts a branch focused on overall economy and commerce. This is one of my favorite branches in the game, as if you have watched any of my guides or my Let's Play videos, you know I'm big into the managing and building up the commandery portion of the game, so I feel right at home here with this branch. It requires no buildings to unlock and is the starter reform for the purple reforms. So if your faction is deemed to be economic focused faction, then you'll start the game with this reform free. In terms of bonuses, it provides a flat 10% increase to commerce income and unlocks a few buildings as well. Now, if you're joining us for the first time in this series, let me clarify now that we will be covering all building unlocks and unit unlock strategies in part 7 and 8 of this guide series, so we will not be going in much details about them now. Moving on, we have the pottery brick reform, which unlocks a branch that leads to cheaper building upkeep. And surprise, surprise, its passive bonus is a 25% discount to building upkeeps. This is a very simple reform, as you'll soon see, and a very simple branch. So let's move on. Next, we have shaft mining. To unlock this branch, you must first own an iron mine specialty county. It provides a 20% discount to all mining construction cost. This includes the iron mine, jade mine, and copper mine, but excludes the salt mine. The in-game info panel states that this enables a branch that allows for better mining techniques. Finally, we have slave mobilization, which requires the level 3 laborer building to unlock. It reduces all your construction time by 1 turn, and it will enable a branch that will lead to a larger workforce. However, I'm a bit confused by these statements because if we take a quick look back at the reform tree here, we can see that the shaft mining and slave mobilization reforms merges into one branch. So I don't see how the game could write 2 different contrasting descriptions here. But anyways, let's wrap up the tier 1 reforms and now we can move to the 4 tier 2 reforms, starting with the mercantile restrictions. As you will soon see, most of the purple reform will just be like this one and only provide some sort of income multiplier bonus as the passive boost. Here we see that the mercantile restriction provides a 15% boost to commerce. It's followed by the government enterprise reform, which adds 10% to industry income. Next is rammed earth, which builds off the pottery brick reform earlier and adds another 25% discount to building upkeep. And finally, we have convict workforce, which adds 20% to industry income. Sadly, it doesn't get too much more exciting in tier 3 as we start with trade association here, and it simply adds 20% to commerce income. The office of arts and craft finally have nothing to do with income and instead add 8 points of satisfaction to Sentinels. To be honest, when you play the game, it's actually quite disappointing when you reach this point and you don't receive any new income multiplier. But when we're going through the purple reforms, it's actually quite refreshing to finally talk about one that doesn't provide any income multiplier. However, this excitement is short-lived as we go back to Guide to Estate Management, and it provides 10% income multiplier to both commerce and industry. And finally, we have the carburetor chambers, which provides 25% to industry income. These industry income multipliers that we've been talking about are actually very valuable, as the buildings in the game actually doesn't provide that much industry income multiplier. So by using reforms, you can reach a much higher potential with your industry income as a whole. Next, we continue with the 4 Tier 4 reforms, starting with State Monopoly, which once again only adds a 15% multiplier to all income sources. And then we come to the most interesting branch splitting in all of the reform tree with the corvée labor and tax computation. If we flash back to the reform tree real quick here, we can see that these two reforms branch off the Guide to Estate Management reform, and they're super interesting because only one of them can be active at any one time. Because if you read their reform description, one of their ability is that they disable the other reform. To start, we can look at corvée labor, which decreases construction time by 1 turn. This reform is basically a policy of having everyone do 1 month of labor every year as a contribution to the state. It is sort of a labor draft, if you want to think it that way. Now, to combat this, you have tax computation, which instead provides a 10% boost to industry income. Thematically, this is the act of paying off the government with a little bit of money to spare you from doing the labor. Therefore, it creates an interesting dynamic here in the reform tree where of these two reforms, they become mutually exclusive from one another. And lastly, we have the horse magnet, which in my opinion is a really, really weird purple reform. It adds 4K population per turn and 20% trade influence. It sounds like a mix of green and blue reform to me, and should probably be in the blue section of the reform tree located closer to the green section, and actually would be the perfect reform to link those two colors with Wuxing synergy. But the game instead have the big branch, the big core of the tree in the middle, causing the blue and the green reforms to split and have no interaction. But this reform ends up somehow smack middle of the purple reform tree for some reason. But it does provide this interesting mix, but it's not what I'm looking for when I am pushing for a purple reform strategy. Now finally, we end up with the 1 Tier 5 purple reform in the state blast furnaces. It provides a 15% income multiplier boost to industry and 12 points of satisfaction to sentinels. Okay, now we have gone through all the individual reforms. It's better now we take a step back and look at our rendering of the purple portion of the reform tree once again and go into analysis of the bigger picture by looking at the reform tree branch by branch, because after all, that's how we are going to be acquiring these reforms in the game. To start, we have this branch here, which I would like to call the private workshop branch. Much like the private workshop building itself, which this branch unlocks, we have a purple theme thing here in the game that gives an outsized commerce income multiplier, which is really a blue thing in the game. If you unlock all 3 of these reforms, you will pick up a passive 45% boost to commerce income, along with the ability to max out your private workshop branch, which will add another 190% to your commerce income. Next, we have what I like to call the main branch of the purple reform. This is the branch that covers a little bit of everything that purple reform tree does, and we can see it from the bonuses listed. You end up with 20 points to sentinel satisfaction, 15% multiplier to income of all sources, 25% income multiplier to industry, and finally a 10% income multiplier to commerce. This branch also requires a branch from the yellow reform, as we mentioned before, because we have state monopolies in this branch, and this will require the iron and salt agency reform to unlock. And finally, this branch leads to the only tier 5 reform in the purple reform tree, and it will unlock the ultimate purple dragon unit, which is the Pearl Dragon, when you unlock the State Blast Furnace reform. Next, we have the this or that branch. I named it simply because it ends with the choice between Corvée Laborer and Tax Computation. This is probably my favorite branch in the reform tree in terms of curiosities, as it's only one that ends where you have a choice that disables one another. Unlocking this branch will provide you with a 20% boost to commerce and industry income, and the final choice between another 10% to industry income or -1 turn to construction time, depending on which of the two choices you go for. And between these two choices, I tend to recommend going for the -1 turn construction time in the beginning of the game, since it's really helpful to build up all your commandery with that shortened time. And once you have gone through your build-up phase, you can switch over to the 10% boost to industry income. Next, we have the useless branch, or the horse magnet branch. This branch is entirely built off of the earlier this or that branch, with the only exception that at the end, instead of going for this or that, you go for horse magnet. So the bonuses are the same as before. You get 20% boost to commerce and industry income multiplier, and you now get 4K population growth and 20% trade influence. These two last traits here are not what I'm looking for in a purple reform. So unless you're really building off a blue reform strategy where you want to maximize your trade influence, I would not be going for this. I would recommend you go for this or that, or just stop at the guide to estate management for the multipliers to commerce and industry. Next, we have the very isolated and very simple Upkeep savings branch. With the pottery brick and rammed earth reforms, combined you'll receive a 50% discount to all your building upkeeps. This is pretty terrible in the early game, but surprisingly decent in the late game, so don't sleep on these savings. Lastly, we have the mining branch, which provides -20% to all mining construction costs, which, as we mentioned earlier, will exclude the salt mine, which really should be an industry income producing blue county rather than a purple county, because it creates this issue where the Wuxing synergy acts like a blue county, but the color code doesn't. Really tripped me up when I was doing the Chengdu commandery guide, but luckily a subscriber pointed this out to me. But aside from that, this branch will also unlock a -1 turn to construction time and a whopping 45% boost to industry income. The two tier 1 reform in this branch are both excellent, and I often find myself taking them in my games pretty early on. It is probably also because I'm a no money pincher when it comes to managing my commanderies, so I highly recommend this branch, especially if you have a lot of mines under your control. With that, this concludes the part 5 of the series covering the purple reform. It's a pretty short one because purple reforms are pretty straightforward, as they tend to provide only income multipliers, and those are pretty easy to explain, and you can clearly see the advantages of those bonuses. Now, I hope you can still learn something from this. Perhaps you didn't know the branch splitting that's mutually exclusive with those two reforms, and add them to your game going forward. And I hope to have you guys back in part 6 as we move on to the last color in the blue reform. As requested, once that video is released, I will be sharing a file containing a complete rendering of my redrawn reform tree to help you guys plan out your reform strategies in your game. Once again, if you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to the channel to receive notification of the latest episode, guides, and Let's Play videos. I'll also take requests in the comment section below for other guides that you want to see on the channel, as well as general suggestions to help improve this channel. So please feel free to drop a comment below. I hope y'all have enjoyed this video, and see y'all next time. Bye!